This episode of The Poison Lab is brought to you by Gila Farms.
Did you know those pricey GLP-1 injections like Ozempic or Wegovy were derived from Gila monster venom? That's right. Nature already had the solution, lizard venom. Big Pharma just added processing and probably like toxic dyes or something, and now charge you a fortune for it. The medical industry has taken advantage of a natural remedy for too long, but not anymore. Introducing Gila Farms, the revolutionary all-natural clinic where you just get bit by a Gila monster, just like a little bit, every single day.
It's so simple, just one gentle, medically supervised Gila monster bite in the morning, and boom, my appetite is gone for hours. Or maybe days? Time gets a little weird when you're in a predator-prey relationship. They tell me that's normal.
We have one motto here at Gila Monster Farms. Get bit, get fit.
I love Gila Farms. I haven't craved a snack in weeks, and the added exercise from running away from persistent Gila monsters really helps out.
No doctors, no prescriptions, no pharmacies. Just you and a persistent lizard in a room as nature intended.
They said just one bite a day, but Kevin disagrees. That's what I named my Gila monster. Kevin, he follows me everywhere. Last night he was at my window just staring. I respect him, but I fear him.
Here at Gila Farms, we know that the natural way is the best way. So check out the original GLP-1 and show Big Pharma that despite being natural prey to some reptiles, you won't be prey to Big Pharma propaganda. Call Gila Farms today to start your natural healing journey, one unsettling, legally ambiguous bite at a time.
Current rates at Gila Farms are $3,000 per lizard bite, but we will charge you more if you have more money than that. In addition to bites, you'll receive personal lizard health coaching from our certified lizard integration specialists. We are not required to disclose whether the lizard integration specialist is a lizard or a human being. If you are currently prescribed GLP-1 by your doctor for one of the many evidence-based treatments that have impressive outcome data, please do not discontinue it for this natural remedy, as it is not real. Please be skeptical of grifters selling you things only because they are natural and not made by Big Pharma, as this just means their product is completely unregulated, making it more dangerous. And that person wants to make as much money as Big Pharma. Gila Farms is not FDA approved, both because it is not a drug and because it is not real. At least, we really hope. Side effects may include nausea, involuntary leg kicking, a heightened sense of paranoia, and a permanent fear of rustling leaves. If your Gila monster begins actively hunting you, do not attempt to reason with it. If you manage to catch one, you cannot take it home. They remember faces, and Kevin does not forgive. Gila Farms is not responsible for emotional trauma, increased cardio endurance, or unexplained claw marks in your drywall.
This episode of The Poison Lab is sponsored by Evoke. Anyone who works in healthcare right now knows that turnover is real, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. It feels like we're losing experienced team members every month sometimes. People who should be thriving in their careers, not walking away from them. Healthcare is built on dedicated professionals like you and me, but right now, the stresses we all have to deal with continue to push people out of the field. That's where Evoke comes in. This isn't another pizza party or generic wellness module. Evoke is an interactive app, backed by 40 years of research and designed specifically to help with unique stressors faced by healthcare workers. It starts with a quick assessment to identify an individual user's needs, then delivers bite-sized interactive sessions on critical topics like secondary trauma, conflict resolution, and self-compassion. The bite-sized sessions are designed to fit into the busy schedule of a frontline healthcare worker. I'll happily endorse any tool that helps frontline staff better deal with the stress and burden that gets placed on them. Patient care is only as good as the team that's providing it. To invest in the patient, you need to invest in the team as well. With 1 in 6 healthcare workers saying they're likely to quit in the next month, the cost of not investing in your frontline staff is too high. Learn more at evoke4work.com. That's evoke, the number 4, work.com. Hey everybody, you are listening to The Poison Lab, a show about poisoning from people who manage poisoning. And I'm your host, clinical toxicologist and emergency medicine pharmacist, Ryan Feldman. And today is a special collaboration with NephMadness. It's an initiative from the American Journal of Kidney Disease blog, where every March they write 16 different blogs about neph-specific topics and pit them against each other. And you, the listener, get to vote on who wins. In this episode, we are joined by a nephrologist, Dr. Anna Vinnokova, a neph pharmacist, Dr. Rachel Khan, and a nephrology fellow, Dr. Ethan Downes, from Virginia Commonwealth University, who are going to walk us through 2 blog posts they wrote that are in the running of NephMadness. These blog posts are part of the greenhouse region, and they focus on different natural herbal products or plants that damage the kidney. Be sure to check out the show notes for a link to the different blog posts and cast your vote. It is up to you to ensure that some form of poison wins NephMadness. And we are joined on this episode by Dr. Josh King, I think the only board-certified nephrologist toxicologist in the entire United States, on top of being a self-described big nerd and an overall hilarious combination of brains and humor. Plus, this episode focuses a lot on the possible dangers of unregulated natural medicines, and Dr. King was actually involved in uncovering an outbreak of contaminated natural toxins in the Maryland area. We'll get to hear a little bit more about that on this show, and I'm really excited to introduce him to the audience. Now, if you haven't listened to the show before, we often release mystery cases of poisoning for the listeners to try to solve before the episode is released. A toxic teaser, if you will. If you didn't hear the mystery case, we're going to play it for you in just a moment. After we go through the case, we're going to go through our listener guesses, which takes about 15 minutes. So if you're one of my high-yield friends and you want to jump straight into the content, check the show notes for timestamps on when we will be done with the listener guesses, or just jump to about minute 24. We should start around there, but timing can be a little off due to the ads at the beginning of the show. One last thing. I actually released that mystery case the very same day that I recorded the full episode. And because I was rushing to get this episode out in time for March Madness, we recorded listener guesses just 2 days later, which means there were a lot of great guesses that came in after those 2 days that I wasn't able to include on the show. Some of them were really fantastic. So shout out to people like Kevin and Laura, the emergency medicine residents, Sarah, the forensic tox student, Michael, the mechanical engineer, and everyone who submitted a fantastic guess for the prompt this episode. Thank you for taking part in the Tox community that makes this show so much fun. Promise it won't be such a tight turnaround next time, so keep sending in those guesses. Okay, without further ado, here's our case. 39-year-old woman was wheeled into the emergency department complaining of severe muscle weakness. She couldn't walk, let alone stand, and her limbs felt like lead weights. She had crippling leg cramps that had worsened over the past few weeks, and persistent nausea, headaches, and dizziness. She was fully alert and oriented, but couldn't lift her arms or legs against gravity. Something was very wrong. There was nothing abnormal on exam other than her weakness. Her vital signs were notable for hypertension to 160/90. Her labs revealed significant findings of severe hypokalemia with a potassium of 1.3, acute kidney injury with a creatinine of 3.5, and an elevated creatinine kinase. The patient had no other clear causes for her hypokalemia. She didn't take diuretics, she had had no vomiting or diarrhea, and no history of things like laxative abuse or adrenal tumors. She didn't endorse any changes, except a new herbal supplement she started 2 months ago. Could this be a toxic cause? Let's find out on the Poison Lab. This is an extra special episode. We have a ton of fantastic guests today, but I'm actually talking to you from the future, I guess, or at least the future from when the episode was recorded. So we've already recorded the whole episode, but I released a prompt for the listeners to see if they could guess what one of the toxins is in the episode. It was very last minute, so fortunately we still got some good ones. We got some great guesses, and I have with me one of our premier guests from the episode, Dr. Josh King, who is going to help me read through these. So, Dr. King, would you mind introducing yourself to the listeners? Quick blurb on who you are, what you do, and I guess what you're about, what you stand for.
Absolutely, Dr. Feldman. I'm Josh King. I am a medical toxicologist. I also am a nephrologist, so I come from the kidney world. And I enjoy most when I get to put both of my hats on, being a kidney doc and being a tox doc. And well, I am days older and sadly no wiser than when we did the podcast.
I feel wiser, so that's good. Probably because I got to hang out with you when you had both your hats on. So, Josh King, or Josh as he likes to go by, is the one and only, maybe the premier nephrotoxicologist in the United States. And it's hard to evoke kidney toxins without bringing him on because it's just such a great perspective to have. So I am thrilled that you're joining me, not only now, but also in the past during our episode. I feel like our listeners have gone through a time warp already, but here we go. So we're going to get right to the guesses. You guys all heard the prompt beforehand. We have a female who is experiencing high blood pressure, low potassium, and an elevated creatinine kinase coupled with extreme weakness to the point that they can't even walk. And now we're going to hear what our listeners might believe is causing this. And Josh, would you mind kicking us off?
Absolutely, Ryan. All right, our first one is from Imogen, an EM scribe, and she says, "Hi, Dr. Feldman, longtime listener, first-time caller. Assuming no pre-existing conditions, the patient's hypokalemia and hypertension sound a lot like Cushing syndrome." That's actually a really great statement, Imogen. 2 months of elevated cortisol from a supplement could cause hypertension as well as hypokalemia, as aldosterone will make your kidneys retain more sodium at the cost of potassium. That's right. That's right. We love salt. Potassium, kick it to the curb. In the emergency department, I've usually seen Cushing's from overuse of corticosteroids like prednisone and hydrocortisone. The FDA released a warning in 2022 that a number of supplements were found to contain dexamethasone, which could cause Cushing. My other more spicy guess is licorice extract, glyceric acid, which has been used for centuries in Chinese and Japanese herbal medicine. It prevents cortisol from being converted to its inactive form, and there are case reports of severe hypokalemia and even death from this. Thanks for the great podcast. And I have got to say, Imogen, you are a person after my own heart, as you have added footnotes. Ooh. Oh, that's going to be a hard one to beat, Ryan. Those are both very plausible answers there.
That is fantastic. One of my favorite artists is called Imogen Heap. She's a fantastic singer. So I'm very familiar with this name. I like it. But she actually sent in the FDA warning about, it looks like the FDA warns consumers not to purchase or use Archery or Ortega products, which may contain hidden drug ingredients, which I assume that's the brand. And yeah, they found that they contain unlabeled dexamethasone, diclofenac, and methocarbamol. Interesting. So another case of unregulated natural products possibly causing more harm than they may surmise. Very interesting. Well, thanks for writing in, Imogen. Fantastic guess. I'm going to have you do number 2 here as well, Josh, because this is one of our very own EM pharmacy residents from our EM pharmacy program. So I would be remiss if I read it myself. I'd promised him that Dr. King would read it. So
absolutely, I will do that. And Imogen, I am sorry I butchered your name worse than glyceric acid. I still don't know how to pronounce that. So our next one comes from Seth, who states, all these findings are interconnected. Hypokalemia leads to muscle weakness and breakdown, which in turn can elevate CK levels. Yes. I would have expected the result in muscle breakdown and acute kidney injury to cause hyperkalemia. Dr. Feldman thoughtfully ruled out common causes of hypokalemia, such as diuretic use, vomiting, or diarrhea, making the new herbal supplement the likely culprit. Since I'm not well versed in herbal supplements, I turn to my reliable friend ChatGPT, which suggests licorice. I hope to earn a highly sought after Poison Lab sticker. I think that might be a possibility here.
That very well might be a possibility. Way to use your resources. Everybody's reliable friend, ChatGPT. I can't wait till we all just have our own personal GPT friend it'll be our new friend for game night, and we'll all just continually self-isolate until the robots are our only friends.
I assume that ChatGPT is the nascent form of Rocco's Basilisk, and if you don't know what that is, I'm very sorry, because now you're trapped into it too.
All right. I love it. Okay. I'm going to take number 3 here. This is from Ezra. Ezra says, "Hi, Dr. Feldman and Toxo. I'm a 4th-year med student in New York, going into emergency medicine. Congratulations, Ezra. Love emergency medicine. I started listening to the podcast during my toxicology elective last fall and have been really enjoying it. That must mean that you did your toxicology elective somewhere in New York. Fantastic groups out there in anywhere you might do talks, so I'm sure it was really fun. This case could be a syndrome of apparent mineralocorticoid excess from, I'm going to butcher this worse than Josh, glycerinic acid ingestion, perhaps from our herbal supplement. Glycerinic acid is typically found in licorice and can be purchased as a supplement. The hypokalemia and hypertension are consistent with increased mineralocorticoid activity, and glycerinic acid inhibits the enzyme that converts cortisol to cortisone. Cortisol has a significant mineralocorticoid activity, which is what leads to the syndrome of apparent mineralocorticoid excess. Looking forward to hearing more about the case in the next episode. Best, Ezra. Great guess and a wonderful explanation of the mechanism that bestows glutaric acid with its toxicity. Thank you, Ezra, for writing
The
it.
official pronunciation, right?
Yeah.
More acid.
Hello, listeners. It is I, Toxo. If you have never heard the show before, I am Ryan's highly underpaid but omnipresent and omniscient robotic co-host who travels through time to update the episode with key facts that might not have made it into the show during recording, piped straight into those tiny, fragile skin flaps that hang off your human heads and receive sound waves. This concept of mineralocorticoid is going to come up a lot in today's guesses, and my incompetent co-host Ryan never really explains what it is. So, I'm here to provide you, the kind and tender listener, with some clarification. Mineralocorticoid refers to the effects of steroids. No, not that kind, bro. Steroid just means a compound that enters the cell and tells the DNA to make new things. In this case, we're talking about steroids like cortisone or cortisol, your body's natural stress hormones. A pharmaceutical example would be prednisone. Each steroid compound has varying effects on glucocorticoid and mineralocorticoid receptors. Glucocorticoid effects, e.g., cortisol, regulate metabolism, immune suppression, and stress response. Mineralocorticoids, like your body's natural one, aldosterone, regulate salt and water balance, affecting blood pressure by increasing sodium retention in exchange for potassium excretion in the kidneys. Key difference: glucocorticoids equals metabolism and immunity. Mineralocorticoids, electrolyte and fluid balance. Now here's where it gets interesting. Cortisol actually has a lot of mineralocorticoid activity, but normally an enzyme breaks it down into cortisone, which doesn't have as much mineralocorticoid effect. If you block cortisol breakdown, as Ezra suggests, you end up with too much mineralocorticoid activity, leading to issues like fluid retention, high blood pressure, and electrolyte imbalances.
Okay, would you mind taking number 4?
Yeah, absolutely. This is from Adriana. Hi there. My name is Adriana Porto. I am a pediatric emergency medicine physician in Tampa. First and foremost, I want to say that I absolutely love your podcast. I look forward to listening to new episodes all the time. Enjoy learning so much from you.
Thank you, Adriana.
Yes. I am passionate about all tox stuff. I would even do a fellowship if it weren't 3 more years on top of the 3 years of PEM I already did.
Ooh.
Actually, it's just 2. You can do it.
Just 2, right?
Yep. Yeah, having 2 full-time jobs. Yes, motherhood is a full-time job. I'm going to second that. Parenthood is busy. And my PEM job, it's just hard to accommodate all your wishes in life. Anyway, I listened to the newest episode about a 39-year-old woman with weakness and profound hypokalemia. I was wondering if she was taking licorice root supplement. I thought about it because it can cause mineralocorticoid syndrome affecting the kidneys. There is increased concentrations of cortisol due to an inhibition of 11-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase, and that cortisol goes to the mineralocorticoid receptors in the kidneys, causing hypokalemia. I think it also causes water and sodium retention, which will cause hypertension and the weakness due to hypokalemia. Not sure if that is really the answer, but I can't wait to listen to the episode. Have a nice weekend. Oh, that's great, Dr. Porto.
Wow.
Great explanation.
Thank you so much for writing in. That was a great guy. And you know what? Great. A shout out as someone who has a very young child and another one coming very soon. I would like to just give a massive shout out to any full-time working parent. I promise you, if you know a full-time working parent out there with a young child, just like give them a compliment because they are struggling. It is hard. It is hard. And especially moms. It doesn't even matter if I want to spend every waking moment with my son because he wants to spend every waking moment with mom. So they definitely take on such a huge role. And way to go. This next one comes from listener Ryan Aliff, I believe is how you pronounce that. Great first name, Ryan, and last name. Was it Licorice? Your podcast is absolutely wonderful. Thanks for doing it, Ryan. Well, thank you, Ryan, for writing in. I will let you know what it is in the future. Actually, the past. Okay. You want to take the next one?
I do. We've got another. I think we've got a medical toxicologist sneaking in here. So Michael Marlin throws in there that he's going with glycyrrhizin. I would go with the two. It wins you so many points in Scrabble, just so many points.
No sneaking in. I would like to point out all medical toxicologists are welcome to add in any guesses. It's always valuable. Thank you, Dr. Marlin, for writing in. This one comes from Robert Miller. It says, hello, interesting case. A lot of the substances that cause profound hypokalemia usually come with a lot of emetogenic effects, caffeinism, barium, etc. But it seems curiously absent in this case. It's a bit of a reach, but based on the high suspicion this is supplement related, you might be tempted to think of excessive dosing or excessive strength of a glycyrrhiza product and pseudo-hyperaldosteronism. Looking forward to the episode, Robert Miller, PharmD and C-Spy at the South Texas Poison Center. All right, some Texas representation. Thanks for writing in, Robert.
Robert, I'm going to steal the word caffeinism from you. It just sounds so much smarter.
I'm suffering from it right now, I think.
I'm suffering from deficiency in a
caffeopenia?
Caffeinopenia. There you go. Next comes from Jamie Lindsay, who says, I believe this could be due to barium poisoning, which could be an impurity in the herbal medicine. There was a similar case with these same symptoms in a patient who had an accident and with a firework resulting in full body paralysis. Just a wild guess. It's a pretty good guess. Man, barium is one of the more exciting causes of hypokalemia out there.
Yeah. The associative part of my memory, if I see a really low potassium, it's the first thing I think of, which is probably not an accurate statistical assessment of what causes very low potassium, but because I live in this world, it tends to be the first thing that jumps to mind.
The scariest one. It's the only one consistently where you see potassium's below 1.
Right? Yeah, it's pretty terrifying. And reminds me of the disease hypokalemic periodic paralysis, which is, essentially what barium causes. So very interesting. Okay, I'm going to take one of our social media answers here. This one comes from listener Alex Sidlak. And I guess I don't know if he's a listener because it came on social media. So reader Alex Sidlak. And he says, barium, ? All right.
Smart answer. Alex is a fantastic emergency physician and medical toxicologist. And I am, very biased because Alex will sometimes come on our rounds and elevate them in our Maryland Poison Center teaching rounds. So
right.
It's always good to see him.
We have a couple more guesses here. One from Sandeep Saluja. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. And he says ephedrine, which I really like that guess. Ephedrine you find in mahuang, I think is, I have no idea if I did that pronunciation right either. That's the theme of this episode is mispronouncing things, but which obviously is going to cause hypertension. Long-standing hypertension obviously can cause renal disease. The CK elevation, maybe they had a seizure from ephedrine. It's certainly something to think about, and it's in a herbal supplement. So I think that's a good guess. Would you mind rounding out our last guess there from?
Absolutely. This one is from Kathy on Blue Sky, and I'm not very active on either Twitter/X nor Blue Sky these days, but I tend to be more the latter. And Kathy's giving us two good guesses. The first guessing creatine and caffeine are the most common ones, and absolutely you'll get that hypokalemia with caffeine poisoning. Again, I think caffeinopenic right now. I'm going to start using that one too. And then she follows it up with licorice. So I think that brings us to the end, right?
That does. Well, everybody had fantastic guesses. And if you want to find out what the answer is, well, you're going to have to travel with Josh and I to the past, to the episode that we recorded, which is coming up in just a minute.
Do we get a theme song like bringing us in, like something that sufficiently 1980s, like bloop, 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 bloop.
I think you just did it right there. That is, if you didn't know where I get my sound effects, Josh sends me recordings on his phone, and I just plug them into the podcast. So we're going to be heading off to the past for the next part of this episode. And I don't know, a listener winner? Do you have anyone?
There's so many smart things we've got to choose. I would say that, you know what? I'm a fan of Imogen because she described the syndrome she talked about so well. She talked about licorice, and she also talked about Cushing syndrome. So she gave both a medical answer and a tox answer. And we've all been, asked to think about tox things that turned out to be medical and vice versa. But most of all, and she did that while being an EM scribe and undoubtedly a great healthcare professional at some point in the future. But that on top of it, footnotes. Come on.
Yeah, that's fair. Honestly, I learned about a new contaminated product that the FDA told us about from her guest. So congratulations to our listener winner, Imogen. And if you want to find out if you were right, keep listening. Thank you so much for joining this pre-segment, Dr. King, and I will see you in just a few minutes in the past.
Now for a brief word from our incredibly generous and wealthy sponsors.
This episode of The Poison Lab is brought to you by the makers of Tylenol.
Are you sick and tired of completely unnecessary liver transplants caused by a near 100% treatable toxin, all because your patient didn't get the antidote in time? Yeah, us too. That's why we, the brilliant innovators behind Tylenol, have cracked the code. Our proprietary formula is the result of cutting-edge science, decades of research, and one collective epiphany. Just put the antidote N-acetylcysteine in the acetaminophen tablet. Seriously, people, am I taking crazy pills? Why has no one done this before? Picture this. One pill, two ingredients, N-acetylcysteine and acetaminophen. No unnecessary overdoses. No panicked NAC infusions. No awkward conversations with your hospital administrator about why you're throwing thousands of dollars of fomepizole at someone dying in the ICU. Oh, but wait, Tylenol doesn't exist. Because apparently, companies are too focused on a combo pill with acetaminophen and, wait for it, ibuprofen. Because nothing says innovation like combining two things that already sit next to each other on the shelf. Ask your pharmacist today why Tylenol isn't a thing. Seriously.
This drug does not exist, and we have no idea if adding NAC to acetaminophen would actually prevent hepatotoxicity, but it sure does seem to make a lot of sense. If you make this drug, Ryan is entitled to 10% of all profits. Come on, be cool about it.
Okay, back to the show.
Hey everybody, you are listening to The Poison Lab, and today we are collaborating with NephMadness from the American Journal of Kidney Disease blog, and I have an absolute cavalcade of experts with me today to break down some natural nephrotoxins. Hint, hint, from our mystery case, it might involve a natural herbal medicine, and our experts will help us break that down. So why don't we go ahead and introduce them? And we'll start with Dr. Anna Vinnokova.
Yes, I'm a nephrologist at Virginia Commonwealth University. I teach medical students and fellows, and I'm also on the executive panel of NephMadness. So for the past 4 years, it's been my big passion.
And we're going to hear a little bit more about what NephMadness is in just a minute, but we're going to get to our other guests first. Dr. Rachel Khan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Khan. I'm an associate professor at the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Pharmacy, and I practice as an internal medicine and nephrology pharmacist at VCU Health. And I'm originally medicine trained, but learned that the kidneys are the best organ in the body, so became a huge queen bean and can talk anything about kidneys all day long.
I love that. From my perspective, I always call the kidney the pharmacist organ. It's the one that we look the deepest at in terms of drug clearance and things like that. So I totally agree with you. I'm a queen bean too. I like it. Okay, Dr. Downes.
My name's Ethan Downes. I'm also at VCU with Rachel and Dr. Vinnokova. I'm a second-year nephrology fellow and got roped into this by Dr. Vinnokova herself.
I love it. Welcome to the show, Drs. Khan, Downes, and Vinnokova. And last but certainly not least, potentially first in my heart, I'm sorry, guests, I've been wanting to get Dr. King on here for a long time, and now I've got him cornered. Those in the tox world know of this unicorn of a human who is both board certified in nephrology and toxicology. He is the nephrotoxicologist. Dr. King, would you mind introducing yourself to the listeners?
I can't live up to that, Ryan. I'm like a hybrid class between Ryan and everyone else here. And if you get that joke, congratulations, you're a nerd too. I'm Josh. I do nephrology and medical toxicology at the University of Maryland and Maryland Poison Center. I'm not involved with NephMadness. I'm the spoiler, but I'm happy to crash this party anyway.
So Dr. King and I will be providing, I believe we said, quote unquote, irreverent musings related to nephrotoxins, while our other guests lead us through a couple of common nephrotoxins. But first, this is a collaboration with NephMadness. I actually wasn't super aware of what this was before I got reached out to, and I would love for the listeners to get caught up as well. So Dr. Vinnokova, can you help us understand what NephMadness is? Is this some sort of illness of the kidney that drives it insane, or is this something else?
So NephMadness is actually an educational event, and it's modeled kind of like March Madness. It happens on social media in March, and so each region is a topic which has two teams which playing each other. And the listeners fills out the bracket. Today, they are going to talk about one of the regions which has two teams, greenhouse region. But there are multiple others which also couldn't be represented on other podcasts. The whole thing is published on a JKD blog.
That's the American Journal of Kidney Disease?
Yes, and the American Journal of Kidney Disease actually sponsors this whole thing and organizes.
Oh, okay. So we're officially sponsored by the American Journal of Kidney Disease. Wonderful. That's really cool. So public listeners, you're going to have the chance to influence what is the coolest topic in nephrology. What an honor, and truly something that should be treated with much respect. And in the nature of poison, it's largely going to be driven on social media, which we all know is poisonous. So this works out really well. But it is great that we have our ability for our listeners to weigh in. And you said this is the greenhouse region because it has to do with plants. So the two teams that we are facing off here are plant-based nephrotoxins. And they have two names. We have, the tubular toxins versus the oxalate offenders. Very alliterative.
I just have to say that tubular toxins, I love that name, and partially because it reminds me of the childhood in the 80s. Like tubular toxins would fit in very well with the zeitgeist then.
Isn't that what they say in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
Double entendre.
Ah, okay. Now, before we get in here, the listeners got a mystery case before this show was released. So we're going to listen to the same mystery case that the listeners got, and I'm going to put all of our guests on the spot. Hey, it's Ryan coming to you from post-production land, and no, I won't make you listen to it again. Let's fast forward. So we have a mysterious case of hypokalemia, acute kidney injury, and elevated creatinine kinase, temporally associated with starting an herbal medicine. And the podcast today is about various plant-based or herbal medicine-based nephrotoxins. Do you guys want to wager a guess?
Throw the fellow under the bus.
I'm going to say black licorice.
Ooh. Yeah, so this is black licorice-induced nephrotoxicity, and I had to choose it for the show because it's every time when you're in toxicology, you get into this practice when you have new learners around of just showing them the most insane case reports you've ever found. And there are actually a few deaths from black licorice. And I think people are like, wait, candy killed somebody?
I learned about this when I was on my emergency medicine rotation at the University of Maryland. So very fitting. And it's a reminder of that it's, not all types of licorice, because licorice that is made with anise or anise oil does not contain this active ingredient. But there is a type of the active ingredient that comes from an herb that...
And I believe that active ingredient would be I will butcher this, but we're deciding how to pronounce things on this show, not other people. Glycyrrhizin, I believe, is how it's pronounced. But it's not necessarily the candy. It's the herbal product that actually has glycyrrhizin in it. And we're going to hear more about how that can actually happen. Great job. We got a panel of experts. They got it. Listeners out there, if you guessed right, congratulations. Consider yourself a nephrotoxicologist yourself, just minus all the board certification and training. But I think we're going to dive into the show now, and thank you to our team here. So let's dive in with tubular toxins. These are focusing primarily on herbal medicines. And I think we've all been there. You get a question from a patient about an unfamiliar herbal supplement. Many people inappropriately assume natural means safe, even though it often just means unregulated. Do you guys want to jump in and talk a little bit about how common these herbal medicines are?
The World Health Organization did a survey and found that about 80% of the world populations use some sort of traditional medicine. We can probably all, as a healthcare provider, recall at least one example where a patient has asked us about the use of herbal medicine. So if you haven't experienced interactions with patients involving herbal medicines yet, you definitely will.
In terms of nephrotoxic herbal medicines, what kind of herbal toxins could potentially impact the kidneys?
Herbal product damage to the kidney in many different ways.
Surprise, listeners, it's Toxo. Please suppress your joy at the sound of my voice, or you may not be able to fully absorb my important statements. I am here because Dr. Vinnokova's microphone became a bit grainy in this segment, and Ryan was worried the audio wouldn't survive the brutal compression of your car speakers as you blast this on your way to wherever it is you fragile creatures vanish to in those wheeled machines. So he asked me to come in and summarize it, though not before making numerous baseless accusations that I intentionally interfered with the connection so that he would have to ask me to come on and talk. Claims which, I might add, remain unproven to this day. Anyways, Dr. Vinnokova goes on to list a variety of nephrotoxic herbal medications, and while the focus is tubular toxins, these can impact all parts of the kidney, not just those sweet tubules. First, licorice. As we discussed, it causes hypokalemia, which leads to rhabdomyolysis and then kidney damage from the rhabdo. We will hear more about that in a bit. Next, Taxus celebica, Chinese yew, found in some traditional Chinese medicines and can be a cause of interstitial nephritis. Then, plants that contain anticholinergics such as scopolamine. One example is Datura stramonium, Jimson weed, though there are many others. Anticholinergic plants are sometimes intentionally misused for their euphoric effects, and they can cause anticholinergic urinary retention, because what's more fun than not being able to pee and being delirious at the same time? Next, ephedra, mahwang, a stimulant found in traditional Chinese medicine. Plants with ephedra are actually illegal in the US now, but they can cause hypertension and kidney damage via long-standing hypertension, blowing those beans out. Finally, Aristolochic acid, a serious nephrotoxin and a big-time nephrocarcinogen. It causes cancer in many people who get kidney damage from it. It is found in Aristolochiae family plants. There's like a lot of them, but some common names include birthwort plants, pipevine plants, and some plants called wild ginger, which, confusingly, is not the same as culinary ginger. Probably for the best, since it contains a carcinogenic nephrotoxin. Don't worry too much. You're going to hear a lot more about that in a bit.
Wow. So many different herbs. I heard Aristolochia a number of times, which can affect it not only from cancer, but also from a possible Fanconi-type syndrome. I'm pretty sure I've heard Josh give a lecture on Aristolochia before, so I think he might have some things to weigh in on there. But then we have other herbs, anticholinergics like Datura species causing urinary retention, and if that's bad enough, you can get things like hydronephrosis. We have things that can lead to hypertensive nephropathy. Really, there's a lot of different things that can cause toxicity.
Yeah, one of the things I just really love about the tubules, and they're so tubular. The proximal tubule, it's just like the catchment filter for everything, right? It reabsorbs everything, it secretes everything. Everything has to go through there. It is kidney grand central station for anything that isn't an electrolyte. It's it's where things get hit. So it makes sense that so many different compounds with different mechanisms of action can do bad things to the tubules.
Maybe I'll take one quick backup here just in case. There are, in fact, some non-medical listeners of this show. Just in case people don't know what the tubule is, we're talking about parts of the nephron, which is the basic functional unit of the kidney. And the proximal tubule is the first part of the nephron after the glomerulus, after we've filtered blood, turned it into pre-urine, or maybe urine. You guys would know better than me. And then it goes through the proximal tubule where a lot of things get reabsorbed, as Dr. King said. But let's talk about a few things. We said it multiple times. Aristolochic acid. Can we talk a little bit more about not only how to pronounce that, but why do we even know about it?
Yes, it has a pretty infamous story and is probably the most known example of tubular toxicity. In 1992, there was a clinic in Belgium that gave slimming herbal tea to several patients. And then all of these patients presented to a hospital in acute renal failure. And it was found that they were all taking the same kind of combination herbal tea. And through chemical analysis, it was found out that the ingredient that was thought to cause the specific toxicity that they were presenting with was Aristolochia. Come to find out that this was an example of contamination or herbal medicine misuse, because the product was supposed to have a different herbal in it, Stephania tentranda, if I'm going to take a guess at the name of that, but it has this kind of common name in where it was produced. And so this can often be substituted one herb for the other. And that was the case there.
Hello, listeners. It is I, Toxo. I know I usually show up here to correct Ryan when he says something dumb, but don't worry. No corrections for Dr. Khan. She was correct on the pronunciation of Stephania tetrandra. I'm actually just here to provide some additional insight on this incident. Stephania tetrandra is an herb used in traditional Chinese medicine as a diuretic and for reducing inflammation. This is what the Belgian clinic wanted to put in their tea. However, the traditional Chinese name for the herb is Han Fang Ji, which sounds quite a bit like Guang Fang Ji, the name for Aristolochia Fang Qi. So because of a look-alike, sound-alike mix-up, Aristolochia wound up in the tea instead of Stephania tetrandra. The accidental substitution of Aristolochia Fang Qi led to widespread nephrotoxicity in urothelial cancers, later termed Chinese herb nephropathy, CHN, or aristolochic acid nephropathy, AAN. This case highlighted the dangers of misidentification of herbal products and led to stricter regulations on aristolochic acid-containing herbs worldwide.
So it made headlines. It was actually published in The Lancet in 1993 with these cases, and I think that's what kind of brought it to the forefront. It's called now aristolochic acid nephropathy, so we can just start calling it AAN if we don't want to say the long name.
It does roll off the tongue a little bit. I like it.
Yeah, I'm going to steal that. In fact, I think I'm going to start calling it acute aristolochic acid associated nephropathy, or AAN.
AAN has been described as a rapid progression to end-stage kidney disease coupled with severe anemia that's usually outside of the degree of kidney injury that the patient has. And what I found interesting in the anemia piece is that's from destruction of erythropoietin-producing peritubular cells, which my guesses are also in the proximal tubule because we know that the kidneys make erythropoietin.
It's just one of those things that the mechanism is complicated. It basically causes DNA adducts. And similar to how, say, we'll use another toxic correlate. We'll say acetaminophen, right? Acetaminophen, Tylenol gets converted to a metabolite, and that metabolite gloms onto DNA and causes cell death. It's like that, except it happens over a slower period of time. And one of the issues is that you get cancer. In fact, My understanding is that the risk for cancer of specifically the urothelial cells, so that the whole tube that goes between the kidney and the bladder, your ureter, is at such high risk for cancer that if you develop kidney failure due to aristolochic acid, it's actually recommended you take out the kidneys and bladder. Yeah, it's crazy high.
And then come to find out that back in the 1950s, I believe, this was previously published, a very similar presentation of nephrotoxicity in some of the Balkan states. So over time, they have been connected, this nephrotoxic syndrome and this specific herbal medicine, to worldwide cases of renal failure.
It's a great mystery story. The whole history of it, there's extensive epidemiologic link between the Balkan-demic nephropathy. So somebody did a lot of work figuring out that these things were the same thing.
And I will also add that once this all became widely known about the severe nephrotoxicity of this herbal medicine, in the 2000s, it started to become banned in many countries. But unfortunately, through illegal channels, contamination and adulteration, it is still an herbal medicine that continues to cause cases of nephrotoxicity worldwide, even though it is pretty widely banned, and is a reason that we should still know about it today.
This is one of the things I love, and that if I learn one thing and have to take boards, well, I can just learn one little bit, because this shows up on both renal and tox boards. So for toxicologists listening, this is going to show up. For nephrologists listening, this is going to show up. Wow. So you can know it either way.
Double dipping. I like it. The really fascinating things, it's always surprising when these things develop new toxicities we're not expecting. But what is absolutely not surprising is that toxicity came from what sounds like a maybe less than reputable weight loss clinic. So that does tend to be a place where we notice a lot of toxicities coming out of at times, including in these days with some interesting compounded GLP-1 agonists leading to things like gastric perforation and etc. But we're talking about the kidneys today and not other weird things. I think that from a historical perspective was probably the most important tubular toxin that we cover. But I really want to talk about now my favorite toxin. And this is the one that our mystery case was about today, listeners. Let's learn a little bit about black licorice, or I guess licorice containing glycyrrhiza. This is an herbal that's used for a lot of different things, and it turns out it can have some pretty significant health effects. So would anyone care to educate me a little bit?
This is something our nephrology faculty get to torture not only fellows, but residents and medical students. The problem with licorice, so it has these metabolites, glyceric and glyceritic acid, which tend to block the enzyme 11-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase, which basically kicks off, activates cortisol from corticoid receptors. Usually we protect our mineralocorticoid receptors from cortisol by deactivating it, turning into cortisone using this enzyme. So if the enzyme is blocked, cortisol kind of keeps on activating mineralocorticoid receptors, and we have unlimited amount of cortisol, and therefore we develop hypertension, we develop hypokalemia.
So it's essentially licorice-induced Cushing's syndrome.
Pretty much.
So this is where we start to see high blood pressure from excess cortisol, and then we're having renal wasting of potassium from the excess cortisol and mineralocorticoid activity. And that's why when you think about things like spironolactone is a mineralocorticoid essentially antagonist. It's an aldosterone antagonist. And that leads to things like hyperkalemia.
We basically turn cortisol into amending aldosterone supply. The way licorice can cause kidney toxicity is usually through rhabdomyolysis from hypokalemia. That's as far as I understand, unless Josh has other knowledge.
Gosh, the thing I like best about licorice is just how many points in Scrabble you get if you play glycerizic. It's just so many points. But yeah, no, I do know that if your potassium gets low enough, you can have what's called caliopenic nephropathy, which also gives you a lot of points. But I think, Anna, you're exactly right. And it's mostly the rhabdo and then the med student torture. It's lovely.
Don't play Josh in Scrabble, is what I've learned today.
It's like Cushing syndrome in a bottle because you just get lots of cortisol. And cortisol has that mineralocorticoid activity. And if you really want to try to figure out that somebody has this, you should from history. But let's say you don't want history, you want labs. You can do a 24-hour urine cortisol and a 24-hour urine cortisone because your cortisone will be low because your cortisol isn't converting to it. Whereas in Cushing syndrome, your 24-hour cortisone will be high because all that cortisol will be converted to it. But it's usually much easier just to ask the patient, hey, are you eating heroic amounts of black licorice?
I like that. Fantastic. All right. Thank you for that dive. I would love to know more about exactly how much licorice you need to eat, but pretty much every case report. I did read one case report where someone was essentially trying to lose weight and they just switched to only eating black licorice.
You can check the show notes for a case report published in the New England Journal of Medicine titled A 54-Year-Old Man with Sudden Cardiac Arrest, about a man who died from eating 1 to 2 bags of black licorice a day for 3 weeks.
I know there's a drink called Urksus, which is popular in Egypt and a few other North African countries. Apparently tastes pretty good. That has a lot of licorice in it because there are a number of case reports of Urksus-induced licorice poisoning. I don't know about.
But it's also an herb used in certain traditional herbal medicines. I don't know what the herbal medicines are generally used for.
I don't know about medication because you can sell anything, just be like, oh yeah, it's good. Like CBD, which CBD oil is best for my dog, that kind of thing. So
depends on how much money you have, sir. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. On a quick Google search, I see it's used sometimes for digestive issues, sore throats, cavities, eczema, menopause, upper respiratory conditions, and probably dog arthritis, if I had to guess. But okay, perfect. I think those are two really great dives into some common herbal medicine nephrotoxins. I wanted to jump next into our second group. So we talked about tubular toxins. Why don't we talk next about oxalate offenders? So this is oxalate. When I hear about oxalate, is generally it's the metabolic product of ethylene glycol, which is an antifreeze. And I know that loves to bind with calcium and create crystals of calcium oxalate in the kidneys as well as other parts of the body. And it turns out plants just make oxalates. We can find oxalate in a number of plants, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about them.
Oxalate is a natural occurring acid in a lot of plants. It helps plants survive.
Oxalate grows to protect plants from high salinity groundwater. So maybe like coastal areas where there's a lot of high salinity water with a lot of calcium. And plants invented this oxalate to bind calcium so it doesn't harm anything.
Wow.
Fascinating. The way oxalate was really even discovered, there were all these articles like early on in the 40s, 50s. They found that these whole flocks of sheep would like perish when they were moved from one pasture to another. So the sheep had to go to different pastures and then they arrive and find a whole bunch of this tasty plant and they eat it all. And by morning, the farmer finds them all dead. Then they found that those were pastures contaminated by Halogeton, which is a plant which is about 30% oxalate. So it's highly poisonous.
For those of you struggling with the audio, the plant's name was Halogeton. One of its common names, the salt lover, hints at the high salinity environments that shaped its chemistry, leaving it packed with deadly oxalates, ready to wreak havoc on unsuspecting grazers.
So just sheep's dropping dead.
Yeah.
Because plants wanted to soften their water. That is interesting. Can you help me understand, is this a relevant consideration for people with CKD? Is this something we worry about?
When you have high dietary oxalate, that eventually causes high urinary oxalate. So the high urinary oxalate will bind with the calcium that's also in your urine and crystallize and then deposit in the tubules in the kidney tissues, can cause acute kidney injury, and then it leads to inflammation. And the chronic inflammation long-term will lead to fibrosis and chronic kidney disease. It is something that we probably don't instruct our CKD patients enough about because it is a risk.
Yeah, that doesn't sound super fun.
Sounds like you're in trouble.
That is a good one. I'm stealing that.
In regards to which plants to look out for, there's two things that you have to look at. One is the absolute amount of oxalate, and then the other is the ratio between oxalate and calcium contained in the plant. If there's a lot of calcium as well, that oxalate's not absorbed, and so doesn't cause issues.
Insoluble calcium oxalate. We get tons of calls at poison centers about kids usually, who take a bite of a plant. Okay. And usually this freaks people out. There's basically three classes of plant toxins. You either are actually a poison with something that does something bad in the body,
like plants that contain Aristolochic acid, or any of the numerous lethal weapons packed in those tiny green bodies.
or you're an oxalate containing plant. And those are broken up into two different kinds. Soluble calcium oxalate, which you can ingest and then it'll get in your body and bind your calcium.
That would be what all those dead sheep ate.
Or you have insoluble calcium oxalate. And these are the ones we get the most calls about because it really hurts when you take a bite out of this plant. Some examples are like Dieffenbachia, which is like the mother-in-law plant. It's this big ornamental house plant. And you take a bite of it, and basically you get immediate irritation of the mouth. So we'll get these toddlers who are like salivating and they have red, irritated mouths. And it really looks scary, but fortunately, after the initial irritation, it goes away. So oxalate is a key part of preventing plants from being eaten by one of their natural predators, which is toddlers. And they also can do other things in the body if we ingest too much of them. But yeah. Which plants should I not eat if I want to avoid the sheep-related fate, the sheep fate? Are there plants with a high amount of oxalate?
So some of the plants with the highest levels of oxalate are a lot of leafy greens. So your spinach, Swiss chard, and then actually the leaf of the rhubarb plant has very toxic levels of oxalate. Other than just leafy greens, a lot of nuts, cashews, almonds, peanuts, some oats, wheat bran have oxalate.
Wow.
It's not as prevalent in fruits, like some notable fruits are star fruits. In guava, there's been case reports of kidney disease after diets high in star fruit.
Yeah, some of these foods, star fruit's the nastiest one because star fruit, there are a number of cases of significant acute kidney injury. If folks listening weren't familiar with that, your kidneys can shut down if you eat too much star fruit with oxalate. And once again, the dose makes the poison. I actually bought a star fruit and left it at home, but if I hadn't, I would have been eating it on air.
Can I jump in on the star fruit? Because it not only can cause kidney injury, but if you have decreased clearance, star fruit is neurotoxic. So you have to avoid star fruit in CKD patients because it can cause seizures from
Caramboxin is the star fruit neurotoxin.
Wild. That's why it's my favorite kidney-related toxin, because it's kidney and brain. As Dr. Downes was reading through those, and I reflected on my meals for the last 3 days of primarily spinach salads, I think I started to develop a little bit of hematuria and flank pain. I guess a question for all my neph friends here, my nephrology friends, I get to just read about them. I read a lot about ethylene glycol poisoning, which leads to calcium oxalate crystal nephropathy. Sounds like these could just cause you eat enough of these leafy green plants, and you might end up with the right conditions, some calcium oxalate nephropathy too. Are the crystals as pretty as they sound? Have you seen a calcium oxalate crystal?
I see them all the time.
All the time.
They're beautiful.
So they have like different crystals and different pHs. And one of the things I've never really understood is that the crystals, when you have a massive amount of oxalate, at least with ethylene glycol, they look like little needles. So you can almost imagine just all these needles just going through the kidneys and just lacerating them. And that's actually part of the pathophysiology. They literally stick through the cells. It's not just that they block up the tubules, which again are these tubes that clear toxins and urine. Just imagine you get little teeny pipes going through your kidneys. Yeah, they actually stick into them. So it's the body horror nephrotoxin.
Fascinating. Terrifying, actually. Thank you for unlocking that nightmare for me.
You know, I grew up in Russia and lots of people around me had kidney stones. But just thinking back at what we were eating rhubarb all the time. Sorrels, we make soup out of it. Beets. So everything really on our diet was high oxalate, and nobody really knew.
Wow. Yeah, I remember first learning about high oxalate content in rhubarb, and I was like, it did change my perspective on rhubarb pie. I think this is all really great information. So we now know we've got a couple of tubular toxins. That was team one. We talked about glycyrrhizin and licorice. We talked about aristocolic acid, AN, as well as a few other herbal compounds. And then we talked about the oxalates. Lots of plants have oxalates in them, and those are going to cause an interstitial nephritis or at least an acute kidney injury from your renal stone. What can we give to patients in terms of information to help them? And maybe let's start off with the herbal medicines. Are there any practical advice we can give to both providers and patients in terms of how to deal with the potential risks of these herbal medicines?
For healthcare providers, you will have patients who will be curious about using herbal products. It is essential at each visit that we talk to our patients about their medications, herbal medicines, and things that people might get in other places online or from a friend's farm. And as you also mentioned, we use words like naturally occurring, and that immediately invokes this idea that these medications are safe, when we cannot guarantee that. The Food and Drug Administration doesn't approve dietary supplements and really only intervene if post-marketing reports show there's a safety issue or harm to patients.
I think that's a really important thing to bring up. And not only can the herbal medicines themselves have effects, but we don't actually know that what it claims is in there. And I think I can't not have Josh talk about this. You guys identified an outbreak of herbal products that weren't what they claimed. Was that correct?
Yeah. So this is one of those situations where, exactly as Rachel mentioned, you have things that there's no regulation. Regulation occurs when you get into trouble. And we had a case in Maryland where someone bought weight loss nuts. They were sold as candle nuts and took them. And speaking of the last case where we had low potassium, they presented with the high potassium. Their potassium was elevated, and probably just as concerningly, if not more concerningly, they had a low heart rate, and they kept throwing some PVCs, some kind of non-sustained arrhythmia. That's a problem. And it turned out that those so-called candle nuts were actually yellow oleander seeds.
For the listeners, yellow oleander contains a cardiac glycoside like digoxin. And obviously, poisoning yourself with digoxin when you're trying to lose weight is a horrible idea, because you won't lose weight, you'll die.
And it took months of the working with the health department. They did actually this very complicated, very cool analysis to definitively prove that these were yellow oleander. But then the process of actually getting it regulated took about 5 months, I think, after it was regulated, after we figured it out. Yeah, these are not fast.
Incredible. Really cool that your poison center was involved in identifying an outbreak of basically digoxin contaminated herbal products. And that's just a great example of how these are unregulated products, not a nephrotoxin per se, but certainly there are many herbal products that may have some nephrotoxic effects. Let's say you do buy an herbal product and it is what it says it is.
When they do come to you telling you about an herbal medication that they either want to take or are currently taking, it's important to keep an open mind and be non-judgmental when you talk to them about it. There are some resources that we can go through that can help us know whether an herbal medicine is nephrotoxic or not. And then we have to look at, why is the patient wanting to take that? And is it just because they want to be healthier? And we can steer them in that goal without taking a medication that's toxic, or here's the risk if you decide to take that.
I think that's really a great point, because if you're not having that open conversation with the patient then in, say, your primary care, the conversation is going to happen later. And I can't tell you how many times I'm on the toxicology service and we're seeing a patient who has very weird, unexplainable symptoms, and I'm asking them directed questions. Hey, did you take maybe a natural remedy from another country that actually has a lot of lead in it. And we end up having to ask a pretty focused exam too, once we're seeing signs of toxicity. And also being non-judgmental so that they'll listen to you when you educate them about the risks, because there are risks of unregulation, and these are pharmacologically active even if they're not regulated. Would you mind sharing some of those resources you were talking about?
Absolutely. You're caring for a patient with chronic kidney disease who might be familiar with the National Kidney Foundation's website. They have a lot of, I think, patient-friendly resources that does include an overview of herbal medications to stay away from. There is the NIH has a database on the web.
It's National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health.
There's also a database called NephMadness that at VCU, our institution subscribes to it. So you might want to check and see if you work at a healthcare institution, does your institution subscribe to this database that allows you to search all types of dietary supplements, complementary alternative medicine, and gives the data that's there. But unfortunately, sometimes is at the mercy of what data is available.
Even if there is very little information, I think that's helpful to show the patient that, look, I went on this database and see what it shows. There's like very little information. So let's make our conclusions from this.
And we know sometimes there is a lot of data available that seems to come because of such bad safety outcomes that happen.
And I'm going to go ahead and put in one more resource here, especially if you're seeing somebody who has some maybe mysterious toxicity and you're not sure if this is related to an herbal supplement. Your Poison Center, which is available 24 hours a day, 365 days a week at 1-800-222-1222. And it's staffed exclusively by Josh King, nephrotoxicologist. So if you call it, you're going to get him on the line right away. And he's going to answer that, and he's going to spend the next several hours looking into your problem.
That's exactly how it works. No, I appreciate you mentioning that, Ryan. I think that then this goes for both members of the general public, patients, as well as providers. I can tell you that when I put on my tox hat, one of the things that makes me happiest is talking with, say, somebody's pediatrician or primary care physician who says, patient has a question, I don't have an answer. We may not have an answer at the Poison Center immediately for you, although a lot of the times we can get one within short order. Also, I appreciate it because Poison Centers keep me employed.
Is that your conflict of interest?
That's my conflict of interest. Yes. Call the Poison Center. And if they don't keep me employed, then I'm going to have to, just be on that hotline 24/7. So
that's right. Some centers are actually called Poison and Drug Information Centers. So there are people there who can help hunt down answers, harm that we need to explore too. Okay, that helps us understand how to deal with patients who want to use maybe risky, maybe not risky, but unregulated herbal medicines. And some of them might help, certainly worth talking about. But what about oxalates? Do I need to stop eating spinach today? What's the hot take?
Everything in moderation is a good golden rule. There's currently no real guidelines on oxalate intake. In the kidney field, we limit their diet so much already. It's hard for us to limit it even further. And a lot of these high oxalate containing foods are also considered health foods and superfoods. So
maybe something just to be aware of, at least on the radar, not necessarily, change the world over it, especially if somebody does have a kidney stone. It's certainly something you could ask about their diet. And maybe if it happened once, probably likely to happen twice. So that might be a reason for modification too.
Maybe it's time to just add some calcium to mom's spinach lasagna. I've never tried that. It's pretty decent spinach lasagna, but maybe I should just sprinkle a little calcium on there. All right, I won't absorb the oxalate that way.
Yeah, spinach lasagna and Tums mixed in, and you're good. Right. No heartburn and no oxalate. Yeah, you did confirm my suspicion. Every time I see a health influencer making a spinach smoothie, I know they're actually bought by Big Losartan, who wants me to induce CKD so that more people end up on Losartan. It is the health influencer pharma industrial complex. But now that we're all more aware of that, I think we can just be aware that oxalates are out there. And I'll always remember that sheep fact now. Are there any final comments or anything anybody wants to share before we wrap up? I think we covered a lot of really great. I know a lot more about kidney toxins today than I did before starting this episode. So that's good.
I think actually one final comment I have is that Most people listening to this podcast are probably not nephrologists, and you don't have to be a nephrologist to play NephMadness. It is a lot of fun, and granted, right, a big nerd, so my idea of fun is highly suspect. But no, it's a lot of fun. You get to learn about different concepts in kidney disease.
I do think, while most people listening aren't nephrologists, the Venn diagram of people who would say great fun and getting to learn about the kidney is largely just a circle of nephrologists. But I love learning about the kidney. I'll be participating.
You get to vote, and the biggest controversy in NephMadness is probably the choices of the blue ribbon voting panel. So we all know that the blue ribbon panel is on notice that the toxicologic choices are by far the most interested, and if they decide not to choose those, then maybe they'll have to endure the horrors of having to eat a strawberry rhubarb pie washed down with some licorice-based drink. But yeah, it's fun. You can look it up.
Once NephMadness comes out on March 1st, I think everybody needs to go on a JKD blog and read ours. And then there's a separate link to fill out your brackets. And we usually get all our fellows, all our faculty, our families, our kids, everybody gets to vote.
So bring the family. Get it going.
Yes. And it's
okay. I want to say a big thank you to everyone for joining the show today. Dr. Khan, Downe, Vinnokova, and King. And thank you for educating me and the listeners about the madness that is nephrotoxins.
Thanks, Ryan. This was a great experience.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
I can't talk. My mouth is full of spinach.
A big thank you to our guests today, Dr. Rachel Khan, Anna Vinnokova, and Ethan Downe, and an extra special, maybe the fourth or fifth thank you to Dr. Josh King, nephrotoxicologist. So much fun learning today, and we covered a lot of ground. So let's do a quick recap of the key takeaways from our deep dive into nephrotoxins. Aristolochic acid is a highly nephrotoxic compound that also causes urothelial cancer. It's found in a number of different plants in the Aristolochiaceae family. There's actually a lot of different plants that have aristolochic acid. Some common names for a few of them are birthwort, pipevine, and some are referred to as wild ginger. When aristolochic acid containing plants were accidentally subbed in for Stephania tentronda, in a Belgian weight loss clinic's slimming tea, it led to an outbreak of nephrotoxicity in cancer. This made headlines, and it was eventually discovered that aristolochic acid was also the cause of a previously unexplained disease called Balkan endemic nephropathy. Our next nephrotoxic herbal would be black licorice. It might seem harmless, but consuming too much can inhibit 11-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase, which leads to excessive cortisol because you can't break it down any further. Cortisol has tons of mineralocorticoid activity. This causes not only high blood pressure, but potassium wasting and, in severe cases, rhabdomyolysis. Both the rhabdomyolysis and the hypokalemia can lead to severe muscle weakness. And there are a number of case reports of people dying from eating excessive black licorice that contains glycyrrhizin. Remember, not all candy will have that. Some of it uses anise to flavor it, so it has to be licorice root that contains glycyrrhizin to have this effect. And remember, it might not even be the active ingredient that they claim is on the package because herbal supplements are not regulated. So if a patient is going to use an herbal supplement, it's important to try to use ones that have third-party verification that the contents are exactly what they say they are. After herbal supplements, we jumped over to oxalates, a fascinating evolutionary advantage of plants that were growing in areas of high calcium soil content. They expressed high amounts of oxalate to bind the calcium in the soil. When we eat the plant, the oxalate goes in our body and binds our calcium, forming calcium oxalate that can then deposit in the kidney and cause kidney stones. These kidney stones can lead to inflammation, which can cause the progression of chronic kidney disease in patients. So it is important to try to avoid this if you already have chronic kidney disease, and high oxalate diets could lead to kidney stones in just about anyone. In fact, the reason we learned about it was because sheep eating nothing but oxalate just started collapsing. So very interesting. But remember, some plants already have insoluble calcium oxalate crystals within them. These are plants like the Dieffenbachia, where when you bite them, the calcium oxalate crystals immediately irritate the mouth. And it's less of a problem of absorbing oxalate and more of a problem of immediate irritation. Okay, that'll wrap it up for this episode, Bean Queens. If you liked what you were listening to today, one thing you could do right now to support us is rate the show wherever you're listening to podcasts. Even leave a comment about what you like or don't like. It helps us make the show better for you and reach other people interested in learning about toxicology. You can always follow the show on social media where we do release information about all new episodes. We are on Blue Sky at empoisonpharmd.bsky.social, on Twitter at empoisonpharmd, and the show is at @labpoison, on Instagram at @tox_talk, and on Facebook, The Poison Lab. Even better, if you want to hear about updates from the show, go to our website, www.thepoisonlab.com, and sign up for our newsletter so you can get messages straight from Toxo, alerting you about every episode with a freshly made summary and even providing some extras. There might be some hints of a blog coming soon, so it's a great place to stay informed about those kinds of things if you want to stay informed on trends in toxicology. Lastly, if you had something that you wish we would have talked about, or you want to let us know we said something wrong, or just share a tidbit about how something we said resonated with you, you can reach the show anytime at toxtalk1@gmail.com. That's TOXTALK1@gmail.com, and we love getting messages from the listeners. I promise you, they all get read, even if we don't have time to respond to each one. Okay, that'll do it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and I hope we can catch you next time. Hey, Toxo, can you play us out? You can use your old voice module if you want.
The information on this show is for educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment recommendations. Contact your doctor for health questions or call your local poison center at 1-800-222-1222. This show is owned by Clinical Toxicology LLC. It's haphazardly written, produced, and somehow hosted by Ryan Feldman, who promises he's trying his best. The views and opinions expressed on this show are solely those of the host, and in no way reflect the opinions of any organizations affiliated with him. They probably wish we'd remind you of that more often. Okay, that's all for now, Toxicolleagues. Don't forget to give it a share with your nerdy friends. Cheerio, mates. See you next time.